Richard Thorne stepped out of the gleaming glass doors of Thorne Enterprises headquarters, his Italian leather briefcase swinging gently at his side. The crisp autumn air bit at his cheeks, but he barely noticed it through the warm shield of success that constantly surrounded him. His driver, Matthews, stood at attention beside the black Mercedes, door already open. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," Matthews said with practiced precision. Richard nodded curtly, checking his Rolex. "We're running 5 minutes behind. The Anderson meeting starts at 9 sharp. We'll make it, sir. Traffic is light this morning." Richard's phone buzzed. His assistant had already sent over the presentation slides for final approval. Everything operated with clockwork efficiency in his world, a world he had meticulously built over 30 years of relentless work and strategic decisions. At 48, Richard Thorne had everything a man could want. His company dominated the tech sector, his penthouse overlooked Central Park, and his name appeared regularly on the covers of business magazines. The sidewalk was busy with morning commuters, but they parted naturally for him. Richard never had to shuffle or squeeze through crowds. Something about his presence, the tailored suit, perhaps, or the unwavering confidence in his stride, created a bubble of space around him. He was halfway to the car when it happened. A sound cut through the city's morning symphony of horns, footsteps, and coffee shop chatter. A child's voice, panicked and raw. "Uncle, my little brother isn't waking up." Richard continued walking, the words barely registering. New York was full of street noise. Beggars, performers, the occasional disturbance. All part of the urban tapestry he'd learned to tune out years ago. "Please, somebody help us." Something in the desperation of the cry made Richard hesitate. He turned his head slightly, almost against his will, eyes searching for the source. About 20 feet away, beside a building entrance, huddled beneath a makeshift shelter of soggy cardboard and a faded blue tarp, was a small boy. His face was streaked with dirt, his clothes hanging loose on his thin frame. He couldn't have been older than 7. In his arms, he cradled a smaller form wrapped in what looked like a torn jacket. People walked past, some glancing with momentary concern before quickening their pace, others keeping their eyes fixed ahead, pretending not to see. "Sir." Matthews was still holding the car door, a questioning look on his face. The Anderson meeting. Richard found himself unable to move. Something about the boy's eyes, wide with fear and glistening with tears, held him in place. "Just give me a minute," he said, surprising himself. He took a step toward the boys, then another. His expensive shoes clicked against the pavement, then crunched over broken glass as he approached their makeshift shelter. The smell hit him first, unwashed bodies, urine, the sourness of poverty that he hadn't experienced since childhood, before his rise to wealth. The older boy looked up at Richard, hope flashing across his face. "Mister, please help. Nico won't wake up properly. He's really cold." Richard crouched down, his tailored pants pressing against the dirty sidewalk. The smaller child, Nico, apparently, was alarmingly still. His small chest barely moved beneath the thin covering, and his lips had a bluish tinge that Richard recognized as a dangerous sign. "How long has he been like this?" Richard asked, reaching out hesitantly. His hands, more accustomed to signing contracts than offering comfort, hovered uncertainly. "Since last night," the older boy said, his voice breaking. "He kept saying he was cold, and I gave him my sweater, but this morning he won't talk to me." Richard touched the child's forehead. It was burning hot despite the boy shivering. "Matthews," Richard called sharply. "Call 911. Now." The driver was already on his phone, his usual stoic expression replaced by concern. Richard took off his cashmere coat, the one that had cost more than some people made in a month, and wrapped it around the small boy. As he did so, something fell from the child's loosely curled fingers, a small, folded photograph, worn at the edges and creased from being handled often. Without thinking, Richard picked it up. When he unfolded it, the world seemed to stop. Staring back at him was a face he hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. Younger, happier, with long dark hair falling around shoulders draped in a simple sundress. Elena. His Elena, or she had been, before ambition pulled him away from their small apartment in Queens, before he decided that love was a luxury he couldn't afford on his way to the top. "This woman," Richard said, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Who is she to you?" The older boy looked at the photo with sad eyes. "That's our mom." She went to find help 3 days ago and didn't come back. She told us to stay here, that someone would find us. Richard felt the ground shift beneath him. The city noise faded to a distant hum. 20 years of carefully constructed walls crumbled in an instant. Your mom's name? He whispered, already knowing the answer. Is it Elena? Elena Moretti. The boy nodded, confusion crossing his dirty face. How did you know that? Are you the one she went to find? She said our dad might help us if she could find him. Richard couldn't breathe. The world, his world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, suddenly felt meaningless. These boys, huddled in squalor on a New York sidewalk, could be his sons. The younger one might be dying, right here, while people walked past without a glance. In the distance, sirens wailed. The ambulance arrived in minutes, though to Richard each second stretched into eternity. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, checking Nico's vitals and quickly loading him onto a stretcher. The older boy, who introduced himself as Danny, refused to leave his brother's side, his small hand clutching Nico's limp one. I'm coming with you, Richard said when the paramedics prepared to close the ambulance doors. His tone left no room for argument, the same voice that had closed billion-dollar deals and silenced boardroom opponents. The paramedic hesitated. Are you a relative, sir? Richard looked at Danny, then at the unconscious child on the stretcher. The truth hung in the air between them, unconfirmed but undeniable. I believe I'm their father, he said quietly, the words strange on his tongue. The ride to New York Presbyterian was a blur. Richard sat rigid on the metal bench, watching the paramedics work on Nico while Danny huddled against him, seeking warmth and comfort from a virtual stranger. Richard awkwardly placed an arm around the boy's thin shoulders, feeling bones. Beneath the dirty t-shirt. Your mom, Richard said carefully. Where did she go to find help? Danny shrugged, his eyes never leaving his brother. She said she knew someone who could help us. She wrote down an address and took it with her. Said it was someone from before, someone who had money. Richard's throat tightened. He'd moved a dozen times in the last 20 years, climbing the property ladder with each business success. But Thorne Enterprises had stood on the same Manhattan block for 15 years. Elena must have seen his name, perhaps in a newspaper or magazine. How long have you been living like that? Richard couldn't bring himself to say on the streets. Since the fire, Danny replied, his voice flat with the practiced detachment of a child who had seen too much. Our apartment burned down 3 weeks ago. Mom said the landlord wouldn't help us because we were already behind on rent. We stayed in a shelter for a while, but Mom got sick, and then they were full one night, and we couldn't get back in. At the hospital, Richard's name worked its usual magic. The emergency room staff snapped to attention, a private room materialized, and a pediatric specialist appeared within minutes. Richard stood back as they transferred Nico to a hospital bed, attaching monitors and inserting in 4-line into his painfully thin arm. Severe pneumonia and malnutrition, the doctor told Richard quietly, stepping away from the bed. His body temperature is dangerously low, and he's showing signs of dehydration. If he'd been out there another night. She let the sentence hang unfinished. Richard nodded mechanically, watching as Danny climbed onto a chair beside his brother's bed, his vigilance unwavering despite his own exhaustion. I want the best care possible, Richard said, whatever it costs. And I need another bed brought in for his brother. Of course, Mr. Thorne. We'll take good care of them both. When the doctor left, Richard sank into a chair by the window. Outside, New York continued its relentless pace. Taxis honking, people rushing, life moving forward with the same momentum that had carried him to success. He pulled out his phone to cancel the Anderson meeting, then stopped, staring at his screen wallpaper, Thorne Enterprises' gleaming headquarters against a blue sky. His life's achievement. The photo of Elena was still in his pocket. He took it out again, studying her face more carefully. The Elena he had known was 22, a nursing student with dreams of helping people and starting a family. They had lived in a cramped apartment in Queens, struggling to make ends meet while Richard took business classes and worked nights. She had believed in him, supported his ambitions, loved him unconditionally. Until the day he told her he was taking the job in California. A chance he couldn't pass up. She had asked him to stay, to marry her, to choose love over ambition. He had kissed her goodbye, promising to send for her when he was settled. He never did. His first million came 3 years later. By then, calling Elena seemed impossible. What could he say after so much silence? As the years passed and his empire grew, she became a distant memory, a chapter closed. He dated models and executives, had brief relationships that fit neatly into his busy schedule, never allowing anyone close enough to threaten his freedom or success. Mister, Danny's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Is Nico going to die? Richard moved to the bedside, seeing in Danny's face echoes of his own features, the shape of the eyes, the set of the jaw. How had he not noticed immediately? No, Richard said firmly. He's getting the best care possible. He'll be okay. Danny nodded, seemingly reassured by Richard's confidence. When Mom comes back, she'll be really happy you helped us. Richard felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Elena had left 3 days ago, supposedly to find him. Why hadn't she made it? Had something happened to her, out there in the city streets? Danny, he said gently, I need to ask you some important questions about your mom. How old are you and Nico? I'm 7.5. Nico's 5. Danny's eyes never left his brother's face. And your last name? Is it Moretti? Danny nodded. Daniel Thorne Moretti. That's what Mom says on important stuff. Nico is Nicholas Thorne Moretti. The middle name hit Richard like a physical blow. She had given them his name, even after he abandoned her. Even knowing they might never meet their father, she had kept that connection alive. Your mom never married? There was never another dad. Danny shook his head. Just Mom. She has a picture of our real dad, but she doesn't talk about him much. Just that he had to go away for work and couldn't come back. He paused, studying Richard with sudden intensity. Do you know our dad? Richard's heart pounded in his chest. The business empire he had built, the wealth he had accumulated, the power he wielded. None of it had prepared him for this moment with this child who carried his blood and name. Danny, he said, his voice barely audible. I think I am your dad. The boy's expression didn't change immediately. He stared at Richard for a long moment, then looked back at his brother. Mom said he was important now, that he lived in a big building with his name on it. Danny's voice was matter of fact, without accusation. She showed us once, from far away. Said that's why he couldn't be with us. Richard felt shame burn through him like acid. What had Elena told these boys about their absent father? Had she spared him their resentment, crafting a story of necessity rather than abandonment? I didn't know, Richard said, the inadequacy of the words striking him even as he spoke them. I didn't know about you and Nico. If I had, but he couldn't finish the sentence. Would he have done anything differently if he had known? 20 years ago, would he have chosen these children over the empire he'd built? A nurse entered the room, breaking the moment. Mr. Thorne, there's a detective here who'd like to speak with you. It's about the boy's mother. Detective Sarah Mendez was a compact woman with sharp eyes and an economy of movement that suggested she didn't waste time on words or actions. She led Richard to a small consultation room down the hall from Nico's room, where a nurse had agreed to stay with the boys. Mr. Thorne, she began, once they were seated. I understand you brought these children in. What's your relationship to them? Richard hesitated, uncertain how to explain a connection he himself was still processing. I believe they're my sons. Their mother and I were together many years ago. Detective Mendez's expression remained neutral. And you've just discovered their existence today? Yes. I found them on the street near my office building. She made a note in her small pad. The older boy told the nurse his mother went looking for help 3 days ago and never returned. He mentioned your name specifically when the social worker spoke with him. Richard nodded, a knot forming in his stomach. Detective, has something happened to Elena? To their mother? Mendez's face softened slightly. A woman matching Elena Moretti's description was brought into Bellevue Hospital 3 days ago. She collapsed on Madison Avenue, not far from your company headquarters. She had pneumonia, severe exhaustion, and signs of malnutrition. She paused, watching Richard carefully. She had your business card in her pocket, a very old one, laminated to preserve it. Is she? Richard couldn't finish the question. She's alive, but in critical condition. She hasn't regained consciousness. The hospital has been trying to identify her, but she had no current ID, only that old business card with your contact information from nearly 20 years ago. Relief flooded through Richard, followed immediately by guilt. Elena was fighting for her life in a hospital across town, while he had spent the morning worrying about the Anderson presentation. I need to see her, he said, standing abruptly. And the boys should know their mother is alive. Mr. Thorne, Detective Mendez said, not rising. There are protocols to follow. Child Protective Services has been notified about the boys. As for Ms. Moretti, until your paternity is established, test me, Richard interrupted. Do whatever DNA test is necessary. But those are my sons in that room, and their mother needs them to know she didn't abandon them. Mendez regarded him steadily. You seem very certain about paternity for someone who, by his own admission, just learned of these children today. Richard took out his wallet and removed a photograph he'd kept hidden behind his driver's license for 20 years. It was Elena, young and laughing, sitting on a park bench in Central Park. He had taken it on her birthday, a week before he left for California. I loved her once, he said quietly, before I decided my career was more important. The timing fits. The boys have my middle name, and they look like me, though I was too blind to see it immediately. Mendez studied the photograph, then looked up at Richard with newfound assessment in her eyes. I'll expedite the DNA testing and speak with CPS. In the meantime, the boys can remain in your temporary custody, under hospital supervision. She stood. I'll arrange for information about their mother's condition. When Richard returned to Nico's room, the younger boy was awake, his eyes glassy with fever but alert. Danny sat beside him on the bed, speaking softly in his ear. Both looked up when Richard entered. Hey, Richard said awkwardly, and used to speaking with children. How are you feeling, Nico? The 5-year-old regarded him solemnly. Are you the man from Mom's picture? Richard moved closer to the bed, noting the improved color in the boy's face. Yes, I am. My name is Richard. Mom said you're very busy doing important things, Nico said matter-of-factly. That's why you couldn't be with us. The simple statement, delivered without judgment, hit Richard harder than any accusation could have. What important things had consumed his life for 2 decades? Board meetings? Acquisitions? Profit margins? Standing in this hospital room, looking at these children, his children, none of it seemed important at all. I have some news, Richard said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Your mom is in another hospital. She got sick, like you did, Nico. The doctors are taking care of her. Both boys' faces lit up. Can we go see her? Danny asked eagerly. Not right away. She's sleeping now, getting stronger. But soon, Richard promised, hoping it was true. I'm going to visit her today, and I'll tell her you're both safe. A nurse entered with a tray of food, simple chicken soup and crackers for Nico, a sandwich and fruit for Danny. The boys fell upon the food with the focused intensity of children who had known hunger. Richard watched them eat, noticing how Danny subtly pushed more crackers toward his younger brother, how he made sure Nico drank all his juice. I'm going to step out and make some calls, Richard said. I'll be right outside the door if you need anything. In the hallway, he called his assistant for the first time since that morning, which now felt like years ago. Cancel all my meetings for the next week, he instructed. And give me the contact information for Elena Moretti at Bellevue Hospital. Then I need you to have someone go to my apartment and bring children's clothing, sizes for boys aged 5 and 7, to New York Presbyterian. And toys, books, whatever is appropriate. His assistant, trained to handle unusual requests without question, simply asked, Anything else, Mr. Thorne? Richard hesitated. Find me the best family law attorney in the city. And a real estate agent. I need a proper home, not a penthouse. Something with a yard, near good schools. After ending the call, Richard leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the seismic shift in his life. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been the Anderson merger. Now, he was making plans to upend his entire existence for 2 boys he'd just met. When he re-entered the room, Nico had fallen asleep again, his small body finally relaxed in the safety of the hospital bed. Danny sat vigilant beside him, though his own eyes were heavy with exhaustion. You should rest too, Richard said gently. Danny shook his head. I need to watch Nico. He gets scared when he wakes up in new places. I'll watch him, Richard offered. I promise I won't leave. Danny considered this, clearly torn between his own fatigue and his responsibility. You'll wake me if he needs me? Absolutely. The boy nodded, then curled up on the second bed the hospital staff had brought in. Within minutes, he was asleep, his face suddenly younger without the weight of worry. Richard sat in the chair between the 2 beds, watching his sons sleep. Sons. The word still felt foreign in his mind. He had never wanted children, or so he'd told himself over the years. They were messy, demanding, incompatible with the lifestyle he'd chosen. Yet seeing these boys, knowing they carried his blood, awakened something primal and protective within him. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Elena's doctor would speak with him at Bellevue at 3 p.m. He had 2 hours. Richard found himself studying the boys' faces, searching for traces of Elena and himself. Danny had his jawline, his determined expression even in sleep. Nico had Elena's delicate features, her long eyelashes resting against pale cheeks. What else had they inherited? Elena's kindness? His ambition? What parts of their personalities had been shaped by poverty and struggle, experiences Richard had deliberately left behind? He pulled out the worn photograph that had fallen from Nico's hand that morning. Elena's smile beamed up at him, untouched by the hardships that had followed. Had she tried to contact him over the years? Had she been too proud, or simply lost in the system as he changed addresses and phone numbers with each upward move? A memory surfaced, Elena, sitting cross-legged on their small apartment floor, surrounded by nursing textbooks. "People are more important than things, Richie," she'd said, using the nickname only she was allowed to use. "I want to build a life that matters, not just a bank account." He had kissed her then, charmed by her idealism while privately believing she would eventually understand his drive for more. She never did. And now, looking at these sleeping children, at what remained of the family they might have had, Richard finally understood what she had meant. His phone buzzed again. The car was waiting to take him to Bellevue. He stood quietly, careful not to wake the boys. At the door, he turned for one last look, committing the scene to memory. "I'll be back," he whispered, a promise to his sleeping sons, to Elena, and to the man he should have been 20 years ago. Bellevue Hospital's intensive care unit was a stark contrast to the polished boardrooms Richard usually occupied. The antiseptic smell, the hushed voices, the constant beeping of monitors, all created an atmosphere of suspended urgency, where every second mattered, yet time seemed to stretch infinitely. Dr. Laura Chen met him outside Elena's room, clipboard in hand. She was direct, her expression compassionate but unvarnished. "Ms. Moretti's condition is precarious," she said, after confirming Richard's identity. "She has severe pneumonia that has progressed to her bloodstream, causing sepsis. The malnutrition and exposure have compromised her immune system significantly. We've got her on broad-spectrum antibiotics and supportive care, but she hasn't regained consciousness since admission." Richard absorbed this, trying to maintain his composure. "What are her chances?" Dr. Chen hesitated. "If she makes it through the next 48 hours, her prognosis improves considerably. But I won't sugarcoat this. She's fighting a difficult battle. Can I see her?" The doctor nodded. "Brief visits are permitted. Talk to her. There's evidence patients can hear even in unconscious states." "And Mr. Thorne?" Her first words when brought in, before losing consciousness, were about her children. She was desperate to know they were safe. Richard's throat tightened. "They are now. They're at Presbyterian, receiving care. The younger boy had pneumonia as well, but he's responding to treatment." Dr. Chen's expression softened. "I'll note that in her chart. It might help, knowing they're okay." Elena's room was dimly lit, the only sounds coming from the ventilator breathing for her and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Richard approached the bed slowly, unprepared for the sight that greeted him. The vibrant, laughing woman from his memories was barely recognizable in the gaunt figure before him. Elena's once lustrous dark hair lay limp against the pillow, streaked with premature gray. Her cheekbones protruded sharply beneath translucent skin, and her hands, those hands that had once painted ambitious dreams in the air as they talked, were thin and chapped, with broken nails and rough patches from exposure. Richard sank into the chair beside her bed. "Elena," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It's Richard. I'm here." He reached for her hand, careful of the foreline. Her fingers were cold, unresponsive. This woman had once been his entire world, before ambition consumed him. They had met in a community college economics class. He the driven student with big dreams, she the compassionate one planning to become a nurse. They had fallen in love quickly, moved in together within months, built a humble life in their tiny Queens apartment while pursuing their separate goals. Until the day a tech startup in California offered him a position he couldn't refuse. Elena had asked him to stay, or to take her with him. He had promised to send for her once he was settled. Empty words, as it turned out. The demanding job consumed him, success intoxicated him, and calling Elena became harder with each passing week, then month, then year. I found the boys, Richard said, gently squeezing her hand. Danny and Nico. They're safe, Elena. Nico was sick, but he's getting better. He's going to be fine. His voice caught. They're incredible, Elena. You did that. You raised amazing children under impossible circumstances. A nurse entered to check Elena's vitals, working quietly around Richard. When she left, he continued speaking, pouring out 20 years of regret. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. What I did was unforgivable. But I'm going to take care of them, Elena. I promise you that. And I'm going to take care of you. Whatever you need, the best doctors, rehabilitation, anything. Just please fight. They need you. They love you so much. Richard stayed for an hour, talking about the boys, about the plans already forming in his mind for their future. When he finally rose to leave, he bent and pressed a gentle kiss to Elena's forehead. I'll be back tomorrow, he promised, with news about the boys. Just keep fighting. On the drive back to Presbyterian, Richard made calls to his lawyer, to a realtor, to his assistant. The mechanisms of his powerful life were now redirected toward a single purpose, creating a safe haven for his newfound family. At the hospital, he found the boys' room transformed. His assistant had outdone herself. New clothes were folded neatly on a shelf. A small collection of books and toys sat on the bedside table, and a tablet loaded with age-appropriate games and movies had been provided. Nico was sitting up in bed, color returning to his cheeks, while Danny cautiously explored the new possessions. You came back, Danny said when Richard entered, surprise evident in his voice. The simple statement cut deep. Of course the boy would expect disappointment. His short life had been defined by it. I promised I would, Richard replied, setting down the bag of additional items he'd picked up on the way. Comfort foods his assistant wouldn't have thought to include, a soft blanket for each boy, and framed copies of Elena's photograph he'd had made. How's Mom? Danny asked immediately. Richard sat on the edge of Nico's bed, choosing his words carefully. She's sick, like Nico was. The doctors are giving her medicine to help her get better. She's sleeping now, to help her body heal. But she will get better, right? Nico's small voice was trusting, his eyes wide. Richard felt the weight of that trust, the responsibility of it. He thought of Elena, fighting for her life across town, her chances uncertain. These boys had already endured so much. He couldn't bear to add to their burden. Yet he wouldn't lie to them. The doctors are doing everything they can, he said gently. Your mom is very strong. She's taken care of you too all this time, hasn't she? That takes incredible strength. Danny nodded solemnly. Mom never gives up, even when things got really bad. Then we won't give up on her, Richard said. We'll keep visiting her, talking to her, letting her know we're waiting for her to get better. Nico scooted closer to Richard, his small body radiating heat from the lingering fever. Can you tell us a story about when you knew Mom? The request surprised Richard. He looked from Nico to Danny, seeing the hunger in their eyes. Not just for a story, but for connection, for history, for the pieces of themselves they'd never known. Your mom was studying to be a nurse when I met her, Richard began, memories flooding back. She was the kindest person I'd ever known, always helping others, even when we barely had enough for ourselves. He told them about their first apartment, about Elena's volunteer work at a homeless shelter even while taking full-time classes, about her dream of working in pediatrics because she loved children. He carefully edited out the parts about their breakup, focusing instead on the vibrant, determined young woman she had been. The boys listened raptly, occasionally asking questions or smiling at particularly endearing details about their mother. Nico eventually drifted off to sleep, his head resting against Richard's arm. Danny lasted longer, his eyes growing heavy only as Richard's stories began to wind down. You should rest too, Richard told him, gently shifting Nico back onto his pillow. The doctor says you can probably go home tomorrow if Nico continues improving. Home? Danny asked, confusion clouding his face. We don't have a home anymore. Richard's heart contracted painfully. You do now, he said firmly. With me, if that's what you want. Danny studied him with eyes too old for his 7 years. For how long? Forever, Richard answered without hesitation. I've missed too much time with you both already. I won't miss any more. The boy nodded slowly, processing this promise from a father he barely knew. What about Mom? She'll come too. When she's better, Richard assured him. I've already found a house with a yard, near a good school. There's a room for each of you, and one for your mom. As Danny finally surrendered to sleep, Richard sat in the dimly lit room, watching over his sons. Across town, Elena fought for her life. The next 48 hours would determine all their futures. Richard had never been a religious man, but that night he prayed for time, for second chances, for the opportunity to rebuild what he had carelessly destroyed 2 decades ago. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Doctors examined Nico, pronounced him well enough for discharge, and provided Richard with detailed instructions for his continued recovery. A social worker interviewed Richard extensively, took notes on his plans for the boys, and arranged for follow-up visits. Detective Mendez returned with preliminary DNA results that confirmed what Richard already knew in his heart. Danny and Nico were indeed his biological sons. "We're still looking into Ms. Moretti's situation," Mendez told him privately. "The building where they lived before the fire was condemned years ago. The landlord was collecting rent illegally, with no services or safety measures in place." Richard felt a surge of anger. "I want that landlord prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Mendez nodded. "Already in progress. There were other families in that building too, Mr. Thorne, all displaced when it burned." The implication was clear. There were more children like Danny and Nico out there, more families crushed by poverty and predatory practices. Richard made a mental note to have his foundation investigate ways to address the broader issue. But today, his focus was singular: getting his sons settled and returning to Elena's bedside. By noon, they were ready to leave. Nico, still weak but improving, sat in a wheelchair as required by hospital policy, clutching a stuffed bear the nurses had given him. Danny stood close by, vigilant as always, wearing new clothes that made him look like any other 7-year-old boy, except for the wariness that lingered in his eyes. "Where are we going?" he asked as they approached the hospital exit. "I found us a temporary place to stay while we get the new house ready," Richard explained. "It's a nice apartment near Central Park. There's a playground nearby." The truth was more complicated. Richard's penthouse, with its minimalist design and priceless art, was no place for children. He'd arranged for a furnished apartment in a family-friendly building, somewhere the boys could feel comfortable while he sorted out the purchase of a proper home. As they stepped outside, Danny stopped abruptly, his body tensing. Richard followed his gaze to the gleaming black Mercedes waiting at the curb, Matthews standing at attention beside it. "It's okay," Richard said gently, realizing the source of the boy's apprehension. "That's just Matthews, my driver. The same one from the other day, remember? He helped us get Nico to the hospital." Danny nodded, but the tension didn't leave his small frame. "We never rode in a car that nice before." Richard felt another pang of guilt. Such a simple thing, a luxury car, was intimidating to his own son. How many other ordinary experiences would be foreign to these boys? What other gaps would he discover in their lives? The ride to the apartment was quiet. Nico pressed his face against the window, watching the city pass by with wide-eyed wonder. Danny remained vigilant, his body positioned protectively beside his brother, as if expecting their good fortune to be snatched away at any moment. Richard's phone buzzed with updates from his assistant, but for the first time in his career, he ignored them. Instead, he pointed out landmarks to the boys, watching their reactions, storing away their smiles like precious treasures. The temporary apartment was on the 15th floor of a modern building with a doorman and security. Richard had instructed his team to make it welcoming for the children. The refrigerator was stocked, the bedrooms prepared with cheerful linens, the living room equipped with a television and game console. It wasn't extravagant by his standards, but he could see the boys' amazement as they tentatively explored the space. "This is all for us?" Nico asked, running his hand over the soft couch in the living room. "For now," Richard confirmed. "Just until we move into the house." Danny stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city spread below. "We can see the park from here," he said quietly. "We'll go there tomorrow if Nico feels up to it," Richard promised. "But for today, the doctor said he should rest." He showed them their bedrooms, adjoining rooms with a connecting door that he guessed might comfort them. Each had been furnished with age-appropriate bedding, books, and toys. Nico immediately climbed onto his bed, testing its softness with open delight, while Danny approached his own more cautiously, as if afraid it might disappear. "Why don't you both rest for a while?" Richard suggested. "I need to go back to the hospital to check on your mom, but Matthews will stay in the building, and the doorman has my number if you need anything." Danny's head snapped up. You're leaving us here? The panic in his voice made Richard pause. Of course, these children had been abandoned before. Their mother had left to find help and never returned. Their own father had vanished before they were born. Only for a short time, Richard assured him. I promise I'll come back. I just need to tell your mom that you're both safe and comfortable. Danny didn't look convinced, but he nodded stoically. We'll be okay. I'll take care of Nico. I know you will, Richard said. But you don't have to do everything alone anymore, Danny. That's what I'm here for now. Before leaving, Richard showed them how to use the intercom to reach the doorman, made sure they understood not to open the door for anyone, and set up the television with child-appropriate programming. He left his personal cell number written prominently on a notepad by the phone, then reluctantly tore himself away from his sons. In the elevator, he called his assistant. I need you to find a live-in nanny with experience handling children from difficult backgrounds. Top credentials, impeccable references, available immediately. By the time Richard reached Bellevue, he'd conducted 3 phone interviews with potential nannies, arranged for a pediatrician to make a house call the following day, and started the paperwork for legal custody of his sons. The momentum of action helped keep his anxiety at bay. Dr. Chin was waiting for him outside Elena's room, her expression guarded. Ms. Moretti had a difficult night, she said without preamble. Her fever spiked, and we had to increase her oxygen support. However, the latest blood tests show the antibiotics are beginning to work. The infection is responding, albeit slowly. Is she awake? Richard asked. Not yet, but there have been periods of increased brain activity. It's a positive sign. Inside the room, Elena looked even smaller than the day before, swallowed by the hospital bed and surrounding equipment. Richard took his now familiar position beside her, taking her hand in his. The boys are safe, he told her quietly. They're in a nice apartment, with comfortable beds and plenty of food. Nico is getting stronger every day. He has your smile, Elena. And Danny, he's so protective of his brother. You raised them right, despite everything. Richard talked for nearly an hour, telling Elena about the boys' reactions to the apartment, about his plans for their future, about the house he was purchasing in a neighborhood with excellent schools. He apologized, over and over, for his absence, for his failure, for the 20 years of hardship she had endured without his support. As he prepared to leave, to return to the sons waiting for him, Elena's fingers twitched in his hand. It was subtle, so faint he might have imagined it. But Richard froze, watching her face intently. Elena, he whispered, hardly daring to hope. Can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered, a barely perceptible movement. Then, slowly, they opened. Her gaze was unfocused at first, confused, but gradually settled on his face. Recognition dawned in her eyes, recognition and something else, something that looked like pain. Richard, her voice was a rasp, barely audible beneath the oxygen mask. I'm here, he said, his own voice breaking. I found the boys, Elena. They're safe. They're with me now. She closed her eyes briefly, tears squeezing out from beneath her lids. When she opened them again, they held a question. They're okay, Richard assured her, understanding without words. Nico was sick, but he's getting better. Danny took care of him. They're incredible kids, Elena. She nodded weakly, relief washing over her face. Then her expression changed, hardened somewhat. Why now? She whispered. The question hung between them, laden with 2 decades of abandonment, struggle, and pain. Richard had rehearsed answers in his mind. Explanations, justifications, pleas for forgiveness. But facing Elena now, all of them seemed hollow. I have no excuse, he said simply. I made the wrong choice 20 years ago. If I could go back. She shook her head slightly, stopping him. The boys, she whispered. They need stability. They'll have it, Richard promised. I've bought a house. I'm arranging everything, schools, doctors, whatever they need. And you, Elena, you'll never have to struggle again. When you're better, there's a place for you with us. Something flickered in her eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or the weight of too many broken promises. My letter, she said, her voice fading with the effort. Did you find it? Richard frowned, confused. Letter? No, I didn't find any letter. Elena's eyes closed, exhaustion claiming her. Ask Danny, she whispered. Gave him, for whoever found them. Important. I will, Richard promised, squeezing her hand gently. Rest now. I'll be back tomorrow with news about the boys. Her lips moved again, forming words too soft to hear. Richard leaned closer. "Don't disappear again," she managed before drifting back into unconsciousness. The words followed Richard out of the hospital, through the bustling city streets, up the elevator to the apartment where his sons waited. Don't disappear again. The simplest of requests, and the most profound of obligations. When he unlocked the apartment door, he found Danny standing just inside, his face a mask of poorly concealed relief. "You came back," the boy said, for the second time in as many days. Richard knelt to meet his son's eyes. "I always will," he said. "That's a promise I intend to keep for the rest of my life." After dinner, a simple meal of pasta that the boys devoured as if it were a gourmet feast, Richard remembered Elena's words. "About a letter, Danny," he said, as they sat together in the living room. "Your mom woke up today, just for a little while." Both boys' faces lit up with identical expressions of hope. "Is she better?" Nico asked eagerly. "She's getting better," Richard said carefully. "She still needs to rest a lot, but she asked about you both. She was very happy to hear you're safe." Danny, ever perceptive, studied Richard's face. "What else did she say?" "She mentioned a letter," Richard replied. "She said she gave it to you, for whoever found you. Do you still have it?" The boy's expression changed, growing serious. He nodded and went to the backpack he'd brought from the hospital, a small, tattered thing that held the few possessions he and Nico had managed to keep. From an inner pocket, he extracted a folded paper, creased and worn at the edges, as if it had been handled many times. "Mom said to give this to whoever helped us," Danny explained, hesitating before handing it over. "She said it was important." Richard took the letter carefully, aware of its significance. The paper was cheap notebook stock, the kind sold in convenience stores. Elena's handwriting, once flowing and confident, was now shaky but still recognizable. "Would you like me to read it aloud?" Richard asked, sensing Danny's curiosity. The boy nodded. "Mom never let me read it. She said it was private." Richard unfolded the paper, smoothing its creases. Nico moved closer, leaning against his side as he began to read. "To whoever finds my children, if you're reading this, it means I've been unable to return to Danny and Nico. I pray they are still safe, still together. They are everything to me, all I have left in this world. My name is Elena Moretti. My sons are Daniel Thorne Moretti, age 7, and Nicholas Thorne Moretti, age 5. Their father is Richard Thorne, though he doesn't know of their existence. This was my choice, my pride, my mistake. We lost our home in a fire 3 weeks ago. I've been trying to find stable housing, but my health has been failing. The shelters are often full, and the streets are no place for children. I'm going to try one last thing, finding their father. I doubt he will remember me after all these years, but the boys deserve a chance at the life I couldn't give them. If you're reading this, I beg you, keep my sons safe. Contact Richard Thorne at Thorne Enterprises if you can. Tell him about our boys. If he doesn't want them, please find someone who will love them, keep them together, give them the stability I couldn't provide. Danny is smart, responsible beyond his years. He loves books and puzzles. Nico is gentle and creative, with a laugh that can light up a room. They deserve so much more than this life I've trapped them in. To whoever has shown kindness to my children in my absence, you hold my heart in your hands. I pray they find him, the man who once said he loved me, and that somewhere inside the successful man he became, there's still a piece of the Richard the First knew, who would never turn his back on his own children. With eternal gratitude, Elena Moretti. Richard's voice broke on the final words. He looked up to find Danny watching him intently, his young face solemn with understanding beyond his years. "You're him," Danny said quietly. "The man she wrote about. Our dad." Richard nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Did you forget about Mom?" Nico asked, his innocent question piercing straight to the heart of Richard's guilt. "No," Richard answered truthfully. "I never forgot her. I just made a terrible mistake. I chose the wrong things, the wrong path, and I've regretted it ever since." Danny's expression remained guarded. "Will you get tired of us too, when we're not new anymore?" The question hit Richard like a physical blow. How could he convince these children, who had experienced nothing but instability and loss, that he was committed for life? Words seemed inadequate, yet they were all he had. "No, Danny, you and Nico are not some novelty that will wear off. You're my sons. I missed 7 years of your lives, 7 years I can never get back. I won't miss another day if I can help it. He took a deep breath. I know I have to earn your trust. I know words aren't enough. But I'm asking for a chance to prove it to you, day by day. Danny considered this, his young face serious with the weight of responsibility for his brother. Finally, he nodded once, a tentative acceptance. Can we see Mom tomorrow? Nico asked, changing the subject with a child's natural resilience. Yes, Richard promised. We'll visit her in the morning. But now, I think it's time for bed. You both need rest. Bedtime was a new experience for Richard, reading stories, checking for monsters under beds, at Nico's insistence, leaving nightlights on. The rituals of childhood were foreign territory, yet he found himself embracing them, discovering a joy he'd never anticipated in these simple moments of connection. Later, after both boys were asleep, Richard sat in the living room with Elena's letter, reading it again in the quiet. The weight of her words, her sacrifice, her desperation, her faith that he might still be worthy of their sons, humbled him completely. He had built an empire of glass and steel, accumulated wealth beyond measure, yet had nearly missed the true treasure that had been waiting all along. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. The pediatrician came to check on Nico and pronounced him on the mend, though still in need of rest and good nutrition. The nanny Richard had hired, Ms. Abernathy, a kind but no-nonsense woman with 20 years' experience, arrived to meet the boys. And Richard's lawyer delivered the paperwork establishing temporary custody, while more permanent arrangements were processed. Through it all, Richard watched his sons begin to adapt to their new reality. Nico, younger and naturally more optimistic, accepted the changes with cautious excitement. Danny remained more reserved, his trust still a fragile thing that Richard handled with care. The visit to Elena's hospital room that afternoon marked another turning point. She was awake when they arrived, still weak but alert, her face transforming with joy at the sight of her sons. Richard hung back, allowing the family reunion its private space, watching as Danny and Nico climbed carefully onto their mother's bed, telling her in excited voices about their new home, the park they could see from their window, the toys and books they now had. When the initial excitement settled, Elena's eyes found Richard. There was no accusation in her gaze, only a weary acceptance and perhaps a flicker of cautious hope. The boys tell me you're taking good care of them, she said softly when the children were distracted by a nurse. Bringing juice. I'm trying, Richard answered. They're incredible, Elena. You did an amazing job, under impossible circumstances. She looked away, a shadow crossing her face. I failed them. We ended up on the streets. Nico nearly died. No, Richard said firmly. I failed all of you. You kept them alive, kept them together, raised them to be kind and brave. I can never make up for what I didn't do, but I'm here now. For all of you, if you'll let me. Elena studied him, searching for the man she had once known in the wealthy stranger before her. The boys need stability, she said finally. They've had so little of it. They'll have it, Richard promised. I've bought a house in Connecticut, space, good schools, a yard. There's room for you too, when you're ready. Your own space, no strings attached. The boys need their mother. A tear slipped down Elena's cheek. And what do you need, Richard? The question caught him off guard with its simplicity and depth. What did he need? For 20 years, he had pursued what he wanted, success, wealth, power. But needs? He hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge those more vulnerable impulses. A second chance, he said quietly. Not with expectations or demands. Just the opportunity to be the father they deserve, and to help give them the life you always wanted for them. Elena nodded slowly. Day by day, she said, an echo of his words to Danny. We'll see. It was enough, more than he deserved, yet exactly what he needed. The following weeks brought rapid changes. Elena's health improved steadily, allowing her release to a rehabilitation facility where she could regain her strength. The new house was prepared, a comfortable colonial on 2 acres, with room for the boys to play and grow. Schools were researched, doctors found, legal matters arranged. Through it all, Richard discovered a new purpose, a richness to life that had nothing to do with financial wealth. He learned to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, to bandage scraped knees, to read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. He discovered Danny's talent for mathematics and Nico's eye for drawing. He learned the patience required for parenting, the joy found in small victories, the profound satisfaction of earning his son's gradual trust. 1 month after finding the boys, Richard moved them into their new home. Elena, now recovered enough to leave rehabilitation, joined them, taking the guest suite on the first floor. Their arrangement was unconventional, not quite a reconciliation, not merely co-parenting, but something uniquely their own, built on the shared love for their children and a fragile new respect. On their first night in the new house, after the boys were asleep, Richard found Elena sitting on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket against the evening chill. "They seem happy," she said as he joined her. Danny smiled today, really smiled, when he saw his room. Richard nodded. "It's a start. A good one, I think." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge above the trees that surrounded their property. So different from the city lights, from the corporate towers where Richard had spent most of his adult life. "I set up a foundation," he said after a while, "in your name, for homeless families, especially those with children. We're already working with the city to develop better emergency housing options." Elena looked at him, surprise in her eyes. "You did that?" "It's not enough," Richard acknowledged. "Nothing could be. But it's something. A beginning." She nodded, understanding. "That's all any of us can ask for, isn't it? A beginning." Inside the house, their son slept peacefully, secure for perhaps the first time in their young lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adjustments, new opportunities to build the family they were becoming. But for tonight, this moment of quiet connection beneath the stars, Richard finally felt truly wealthy in all the ways that mattered. "A beginning," he agreed, his voice soft with promise. "And this time, I'm not going anywhere."